Today we're going to talk about war stuff. More actually weapons. There's many creative weapons out there, but here's some that you have more likely have never heard or seen. Interestingly, there are many different weapons out there, but let's dive into some odd weapons. Considering the past are full of conflicts between different people, factions, and countries, and such advances in weapon technology have long been a vital way for armies to keep a leg up on their rivals. Not arms, just legs. Along the way, people have come up with very interesting ways to fight one another. Despite their novelty, these weapons have remained relatively obscure in history. In this list, we're gonna give you a little attention to things for good reason with weapons. When people think of Roman hand-to-hand weapons, century shields, spears, and gladiator equipment usually comes to mind. Also, tiger, lions, and bears are mine. One of the lesser-known weapons the Romans used was called the plumbata, also known as mariobalbos. The plumbata was simply in its design. A spear or dart head on the end of a small weight, attached to a wooden shaft laced with feathers. It became a small-range weapon, and that was effective if thrown underarm or overarm. I don't know if you could do a slider with it, but just how effective were they? In order to gauge that, all you'd have to do is take a look within the military institution of the Romans. Known in its native language as De Militari, a military book written in AD 390, the exercise of the loaded javelin, called Maritabarboli, must not be omitted. We formerly had 2 legions in these sanctions consisting of 6,000 men each, which from their extraordinary dexterity and skill to use these weapons, were distinguished by the same people. They supported for a long time the weight for all weapons of war, and distinguished themselves so remarkable that the Emperor Maximum, on their accession, honored them with the titles Javelin and Herculean, and performed them before all other legions. Every soldier carries 5 of these javelins in the hollow of their shields, and thus the legendary soldiers seem to supply places for archers, for they both the men and the horses of the enemy before they come within reach of the common missile weapons. Quite fascinating and quite versatile. The Trident main gauge, or Trident main gauge, sorry with all these mispronunciations, I'm having a day. It was a type of dagger called the Trident Dagger. A lot of people may know this or seen it in anime or cartoons around the world, which was a small blade held in the left hand to parry sword fights. There were many different types of parrying daggers, but the Trident Gauge had one special feature that kicked all others to the curb. Spring-loaded arms at the press of a button, this dagger would sprout 2 arms that came out on either side, giving the dagger a trident-like look. The arms were designed in a way so that the stabbing potential of the dagger was kept, meaning it was enhanced defense capabilities without completely sacrificing its offensive ones. Should the dagger be needed in the main hand, arms could be tucked away so that it had its full offense potential. I like the look of it. It's quite pokey. One problem with fighting enemies who are on horseback is that it's hard to get a solid blow in one of your opponents and higher than you. One invention that was used to help even the playing field was a fearsome man catcher. Just as it looks, the man catcher consists of a hoop with spikes around the inside. Man catchers were used to snag riders around the neck and then drag them off their horses, making them easier to kill. The device saw its fair share of use during the wars of the 1500s. The man catcher also had a secondary use. During war, it was sometimes used to capture important enemies, such as nobles, in a way that kept them alive. It is also useful in times of peace for catching criminals, making it a more terrifying version of modern-day handcuffs. The capturing end of the pole was spring-loaded so that the neck could slip right in, quite easily, while the spikes kept the neck from getting out. During World War I, soldiers got a nasty taste of trench warfare. Due to the cramped claustrophobic situation, the troops often found themselves fighting in. They sometimes had to resort to medieval mindset just to stay alive. It was a dirty, bloody conflict, and close quarters with trench weapons had to be simple, ruthless, and efficient, if they were to be able to be effective at all. Some of these simplistic trench weapons were stranded military equipment such as the trench club, a simple wooden weapon meant for melee combat. It's pretty easy to say, trench and a club. It's creative, whoever thought of that name. There are so many examples where makeshift weapons were also crafted by soldiers themselves. One such weapon was the Gauntlet Dagger, a gauntlet made out of crudely arranged light armor with a knife sticking out of its fist. It even came with a bar for you to hold and straps to attach the thing to your forearm. Even though the gauntlet essentially took up your whole hand, it was thought to hold such a weapon would be raised by a soldier's morale, so the pros and cons sort of balanced out. Unfortunately, there aren't many records of its origin. A 1920 listing of the item called a spike gauntlet, German ? While another record labels it Anglo-French. Neither of these listings mention any evidence for their claims of the country of origin. Regardless, it shows the lengths of soldiers would go to order maintain peace of mind in the trenches. What type of weapon would you have? I think it's quite creative and quite medieval. The problem with keeping rowdy prisoners in check is that jailers often have to put themselves in potential danger to perform their duties. Nowadays, it's quite easy to throw in a gas bomb or pepper spray or water and so forth, but during the 17th century, some locksmiths had the ingenious idea of empowering jailers to help keep prisoners in check. Given that it was hard, if not impossible, for a jailer to hold a weapon and unlock a cell door at the same time, the solution was to make the key itself a weapon. Key guns were just that, keys that contained single-shot pistols within their bodies. Despite the seemingly high novelty value, key guns went through several iterations. Some key guns required the jailer to light the gunpowder with a match in order to set it off from the gun, but other models came with a flintlock mechanism where it was easier to fire in a pinch. I'd rather have the flint one, but other one may take a few stabbings before I get it shot off, but the trigger was often around or inside the key's handle itself, which meant the jailer had to take special care when they opened the door cell, and if they slipped and shot, that'd probably be a bad thing. Some of the more inventive experiments in history weren't necessarily about changing weapons. Sometimes people put in the effort to modify defense items so that they could perform a more offensive role. This was the case with Lantern Shield, creative, which sports so many features that calls it a shield. It doesn't do it justice. The Lantern Shield base was a round shield attached to the shield with an iron gauntlet, which was worn to equip the shield. On the gauntlet, there were two separated blades for snapping on opponents' blades. If that wasn't enough, parallel to the gauntlet was a longer blade, attached to the shield itself that could be used as an offensive stabbing weapon. Spikes also studded the shield's surface. Why not? Give it a little flair and glam. The best feature, and the one that gives this weapon its name, is a secret weapon hidden within it. Behind the shield, the wielder would place a lit lantern. A small leather flap on the front of the shield could be lifted up to reveal the lantern behind it. The idea was that if someone's attacking you, you could open the flap. The sudden light from the lantern would dazzle and confuse them, and your opponent would be confused, to say the least, to see a glowing shield. The idea of a waving lantern at someone would make them confused and may even seem ineffective and somewhere silly nowadays, but given how fencers also carry lanterns to blind their opponents, the idea probably stems from them, proven techniques at that time. During the 13th century, people were trying to discover interesting ways to tackle armed knights. Heavy weapons such as maces were effective at carrying in armor, while bladed weapons were better at harming the person within it. When the Flemish were faced with the problem of French knights, they decided to go with both strategies at once. The Goddanus was a wooden club reinforced with iron rings that had a spike set at the top. Its weight allowed it to swing like a mace, but the point allowed for a piercing attack as well. Why the name of it? Well, there are two theories. The first say that it originated from the Flemish Goddanus, meaning good dagger. The second claims it stems from the Flemish word for good day, The story behind those are wielded, the weapon would say Goddanus to people as they pass by. If the reply came back in French, the passer would be bludgeoned on the spot. As for its effectiveness, it did very well for a brief period. It was cheap, easy to make, and effective to boot. The Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302 saw 500 French knights falling to this weapon alone, and rumors spread that one Goddanus would take out 2 mountain knights. It kept its fearful reputation until the Battle of Rosbeck in 1382, when French battle axes and maces outdid the humble stick, punishing or pushing the weapon into an early retirement. One of the most iconic movie quotes regarding revolvers comes from Dirty Harry, with the character asking, "Did I fire 6 shots or only 5?" If Harry had been packing a Inoi Revolver, that question would have been a little more ridiculous. See, because this odd weapon could hold 48 bullets in its cylinder. The revolver was created by Joseph Inoi in England in 1855. More details of its interesting design can be found on its patent listing. 2 or more revolving breech pieces are connected to a frame attached to the stock in such a manner that when the charges in the chambers of one breech piece have all been fired, the breech piece may have been removed and other ready to change, be successful substitute in its place. The end result was something akin to a wheel of a revolver chamber, in which exactly how the gun got its name, the Ferris wheel. Unfortunately, while its easy access chambers and its impressively built count was revolutionary at the time, I mean, look at this thing. It's quite amazing. I'd want that. That's intimidating. You don't even have to fire it. You can fire spaghetti. It's still scary. For one, the weight of the chambers made the piece very heavy, and the gun itself was tricky to hold. That made aiming the weapon in the first place a chore. If that wasn't bad enough, its design meant for no way to be effectively holstered, meaning you'd have to carry around a heavy revolver in your hand wherever you went. As creative the piece as, it flopped and didn't see mass production. Quite cool though. You could probably put it on your waist or something, and then lift your leg like a Grindhouse movie. Some of the deadliest weapons used during World War II were mines, which was so feared that special mine-sweeping tanks had to be invented to clear the explosives before they harmed any infantry. One of the ideas that came out of World War II was to take the ground-based terror that minefields gave and put it into the air. The unrouted projectile rocket launcher was a large anti-air gun designed to go hand in hand with other AA guns. The idea was that the UOP, or UP rocket launcher, makes sense, would fire a slew of 10 rockets into the sky. At 300 meters or 1,000 feet, the rockets would explode and scatter mines supported by parachutes with cables open to 120 meters or 400 feet length. Planes would hopefully then fly into the mines, but the abnormally long cables were designed so that the planes could snag the parachute or the wires instead and drag the mines into itself, making it easier for the mines to hit the target. How did it fare? Not very well, actually. The key element of the mine on the ground was that it was hard to spot. Enemy planes would easily dodge the floating bombs with their conspicuous parachutes. Even worse, should the rockets explode a little too close to the ship, the crew would find themselves under attack by their own weapon, as the mines floated back down. That's the troubling thing with gravity. When it comes to performance, guns have always had to carry 2 traits: power and accuracy. The art of a perfect gun comes from fine balance between these two, packed into a system that can hold and carry a single soldier. The wall gun, an invention that's spanning from the 15th to 19th centuries, was an example where the demand for power and accuracy was taken a little too extreme. Wall guns weren't too mechanically different from regular rifles. They loaded bullets the same way and fired the same way. What set them apart was the fact that the minimum barrel length of these guns were extremely long, about 5 feet long, or 1.5 meters. The incredible length had a purpose. Such a long barrel meant that the bullet would come out faster, and with more accuracy as well, than it would from a regular rifle. It makes a little sense, I guess. With this gun's counterparts had more trouble shooting someone at a distance of 100 feet, Wall guns could take out a target at 600 feet, making them early versions of sniper rifles. Their length did mean that they had to be fired off a tripod or wall, which is how they got their name. Carrying a wall gun from one point to another took several soldiers, sometimes even a cart. Who used them? Well, the idea was kicked about in Asia during the 15th century, but the British ran with it, and during the 17th century began producing these guns for naval fleets. Makes sense. The Chinese had their own variant used from the 1700s up until World War II, which was nicknamed the Jingao by the British. It was eventually outshone by advances in technology, but a near comical length makes it much sought after piece of gun collectors around the world today. I find it quite cool. It's sort of like a Acme cartoon. Anyway, what's your favorite weird weapon from today? Hope you have a great one. Bye-bye.